All right. Now that you've greeted the customer, moving on, you're starting to do what we call the research. And research here is twofold. So one is you're doing your own backend research before you speak to a customer, because obviously you shouldn't have to ask a question if you can find out that information ahead of time. But also it could be live research that you're doing as you're interviewing your customer and trying to understand their needs. So if you notice with the greet, in the greet, generally you're asking questions about them, not necessarily about their needs or in and around their usage of, let's say, the potential solution that you're offering. So this is where you shift gears a bit, and it's less about those quote unquote non-business conversations, and it's a bit more targeted with the objective of really understanding either, number one, do they have the problem? What are their motivations? What's their timeline? So qualifying kind of questions. Or it may also be questions that are related to understanding how you can position your solution based on what they care about. So for example, if you, let's say if you sell a special kind of cutlery, and your cutlery is really good at cutting special types of steak. So you want to be able to understand how you can highlight that in context to what a customer is going to be using the cutlery for. So you may ask them questions related to like their eating habits, right? So here in and around research, the goal is to try to use open-ended questions. And if you're not familiar with the term open-ended versus close-ended, basically a close-ended question is a question that ends in a yes or a no or a single word answer. It's not very conversational. It doesn't really generate a lot of response, a lot of insights. And if you ask a lot of open-ended questions, you will tend to come across as being a bit more interrogative. So open-ended questions, on the other hand, are more in and around, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? So you're kind of getting people to uncover habits around, how do they use those solutions? What are alternatives? Why? What do they consider? What are they interested in? Those kind of things. Generally, in the research side of things, it's a bit like doing customer discovery. So if you're not familiar with customer discovery, you're just basically trying to understand a customer's needs. You're doing mostly a lot of listening. So you shouldn't be pitching, you shouldn't be speaking too much. You're primarily about 80% listening, and only 20% of your time is engaged in discussion. The key reminder here that a lot of salespeople make as a mistake is you are listening for what they want, not what you want to hear. So again, I mentioned this before. Don't listen for the sake of replying. Listen for the sake of understanding, right? Focus on what the customer needs and wants. So that's kind of the kind of strategy. Once a customer starts talking, you don't just focus on listening. If you find that you're in a situation where you're having to ask a customer a lot of questions, it can kind of feel a bit like an interrogation where you're trying to dig information out of them, and you want to try to avoid that. And a good way of avoiding that is to acknowledge in between. So, if a customer has said something, you could say, oh, interesting that you mentioned that, let me kind of confirm, is this kind of the case? And then from there, you may ask another follow-on question, right? It shows that acknowledgement shows that you're actively listening and that you really understand the customer, and it helps make the conversation flow a bit more smoother instead of just question, answer, right? So you could just repeat the same thing back to them. Maybe you make a comment about something, and then you move on to the next question. Another thing that will help you kind of move out of that listening for the sake of replying kind of trap is to actually have the practice of writing things down. I don't know why a lot of reps don't do this nowadays, but take notes. You can prior to a conversation, just ask for permission. Say, hey, is it okay if I make some notes? I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. I want to make sure that I get everything correct, right? So taking notes, number one, it shows the customer that you really are listening to them, that you really understand them. But number two, it also allows you to offload that kind of mental load of remembering everything. So you're not listening for that sake of, oh, customer said this, I should use this in my pitch, nothing like that, right? So just write it all down. It really allows you to just focus on understanding and focusing on relating to their problems as well. So yeah, if you can do your homework beforehand, You want to try to get as much information as possible before getting into those calls or those meetings. You can do these in terms of researching them as you're doing your list building, as you're trying to qualify them. You want to understand not only their needs, but you want to understand the industry, their landscape, understand what their peers are doing, what is kind of general industry best practice, who are their competitors, what is the market or industry trend, right? Because all of this will help you as you move into positioning a solution, show the customer that not only are you able to meet their needs, but you're able to understand them better than they might even understand themselves. One tip is, if you can, this will be helpful because it will help you on two fronts. Number one, it will help you understand how to talk about what value you're creating for your customer in terms of your solution. And number two is, once you start to implement on the account management side of things, this will help you benchmark and track progress. So you can come back to them and say like, hey, you know what? This was where you are when you started with us. This is where you're at after you started with us. It helps quantify the improvement that you've made in their life. So you want to try to quantify that value. And here's just one rough example, right? It's called the 3 deep questioning strategy. And then the example here is, for example, is, you may say, hey, you're having delivery issues with your current supplier. How does that translate to your business? So you're digging a step deeper. Let's say the prospect might say, oh, it's delaying our delivery to hospitals and ambulance drivers who need the products on time. You might say, hey, how does that impact, or what impact does that have on your efficiencies and bottom line? We spend a lot of time, energy, and money negotiating returns, tracking down deliveries. It's cutting into our profit margin, and it creates a ripple effect that ultimately affects the patients. So then you might dig a bit deeper. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's more, but the goal is really to understand, like, at the end of the day, if you can attach some sort of value to it. So, for example, here, what would it mean to you to have guaranteed quality products delivered on time? You might say something like, we really want to partner with high quality companies that can deliver on time because we spend about $5,000 a year last year alone on issues related to returns. So if you can quantify that, then it makes it a lot easier for you once you've started to implement your solution to actually come back and say, hey, look, this was your number before. Now that you're working with us, here's the improvement that we've made. Or it will also help you inform and understand how to talk about pricing as well, for example. Because if there's a dollar value attached to it, you can show them how you're able to save them that money, or maybe even help them make more money. Make sense? So in some cases, of course, not every form of value is quantifiable. And if that's the case, then you want to understand what is underlying in terms of their motivations, their desires, their interests, not only as an organization, but also on an individual level as well. Because, for example, if someone is brought on board as, let's say, a new marketing person, generally that new marketing person will have certain ambitions around proving themselves. And if you're able to address that, if you're able to show them how your solution will help them open new doors for the company and position them in a favorable light, then you probably have a good first step into that sales conversation. Make sense? If you are ever unclear about anything, this is your opportunity to clarify. Never make any assumption. Just ask a question. So if you're not sure about anything, just ask a question. It's always better to demonstrate that you're unclear and be open to getting more information rather than trying to look like a smartass and on the other side of the picture, actually pitch the wrong kind of solution or demonstrate to the customer that you're not actively listening or paying attention to them, right? Try to avoid pitching until you've really understood the customer in enough detail. And if you do have to pitch, which we'll go into right after the research, is you want to try to avoid pitching the same way over and over again. So here's a quick exercise that you can do, both you and your team, is both on the marketing or sales sides, start to think about what are some questions that we can ask that will help us uncover those customer needs. You don't have to end up asking all of these questions, but you'll have those options so that, depending on who you're speaking to, depending on, what funnel the customer is coming in from, you can position one or the other question depending on what you think is more important for you, right? As you think about these questions, don't think about the questions in direct relation to the features that you have. Instead, you want to focus on understanding how these questions can speak to specific benefits and values that your features address. So for example, to help you better understand that, and we'll go into the feature benefits value cycle when we talk about pitching. But let's say, for example, here, if you have a cell phone, if you want to highlight the features of the camera, let's say motion photos, then this feature, what it allows you to do is it will allow you to take a snapshot, a short video clip of what happens before and after each picture. And it allows you to select the best image that you want to capture, especially if you have moving targets or children, right? So one question you could ask is, you may ask people like, tell me, how do you use your phone to take pictures? But instead of doing that, which is more feature-oriented, a better question might be to ask someone more value-related questions. You might ask them like, hey, tell me, do you have kids? If they look like someone who might have kids, right? Or, do you do sports? Because then you can understand like, oh, based on their interests, based on their background, from there, I can position the feature, and it's not just directly about how they use their phone specifically. Make sense? So it's more about the benefit and the value that relates to the customer. Before we move into pitching, I want to quickly talk about a framework that is quite popular in current literature. It's called the Challenger Sales Framework. To understand the Challenger salesperson, the book premises that Challenger salespeople are usually the top performers in any given organization, more so than what they call consultative salespeople. These are needs-based salesperson. Excuse me. The main framework is that the Challenger has a different view of the world, and it's not so much about trying to get your customer to feel necessarily welcome, but it's more about debating and pushing the customer in their best interest. So I want to preface that and really highlight and emphasize in their best interest. It's not about debating and pushing a customer to buy something that is not beneficial for them. But in order to do that, in order to be able to challenge a customer, you need to first have a strong understanding of the customer's business. Therefore, this is where you need to not only ask the right questions, but also do the right research and also pay attention to not only that specific customer, but when I say peers, similar customers to them, other people who are looking for your kind of solution, in order to really understand like what is really truly the best for that type of person. The main contrast is if you focus on being a relationship builder, it's more about acceptance, right? It's about being accepted by the customer. It's focused on customer convenience. So you're not working or challenging on their timeline, but you want to just make it as friction-free possible for them. You want to make it as what's the word for it? Basic as you want to make it as conflict avoidant as possible. On the other hand, if you're a challenger salesperson, you're pushing a customer out of their comfort zone. But what I want to note here is you're not pushing them out of the comfort zone in a bad way, right? You're focusing on the customer value. And in order to be a good and effective challenger salesperson, you need to understand the customer's internal motivation and their own timelines and their own desires as well. Because if you start to push them in a way that does not resonate with their personal desires, then you will end up as being a pushy salesperson. So just be careful about that. A lot of it is really based on both research and experience. So it's a lot of deep understanding. So don't confuse it with just simply trying to put what you think is best for the customer without proper context in it. You still have to ask the right questions. You still have to understand specific to this customer. Yes, I understand kind of their persona, their profile, their industry very well, but who does this specific customer care about? Why do they care about those different things? It may be different, right? The challenger approach, the main difference then as we move into the presentation and pitching side of things is it's really about tailoring a solution for them. And it's a little bit about educating them as well. So reframing things, helping them understand why they need something if they aren't personally already aware of it. There's a whole blog post that goes into it in a lot more detail. So I'll leave the link here. You can check it out on your own time. But in and around the topic of a challenger-based approach, as you are kind of doing that research, trying to uncover your customer needs, and as you're transitioning into pitching to them, the one thing I want to leave you with as something to be very mindful of, especially if you're adopting a challenger approach, is to understand the difference between kindness and niceness. And what I say over here is, it's easy to be nice. Being nice is kind of the conflict avoidant path, right? It is the easy thing to do because you're not actually standing for someone. And I would say kindness is not necessarily the same as niceness. It's not necessarily associated with weakness, right? A lot of people think that kindness and niceness are synonymous, but they're very different because you can be nice and be passive. You can be nice and just not cause any trouble. But really, to be kind, you need to actually solve the problem. You can be nice and you can be polite, but to be kind, you need to be honest. You need to be authentic. You need to have courage to say the things that need to be said at the right time, right? All this comes from a great quote from one of the Masters of Scale episode where Daniel Lubitsky, the founder of Kind, actually talks about the difference between kindness and niceness. So it's more difficult and confrontational to be kind. So we generally as humans try to default to being nice. To be kind, you have to be really willing to tell the hard truths. You have to be able to explain why, even if it feels uncomfortable to you. If they're not a fit, then that's okay as well. To be kind is to be honest, right? To tell them if you're not a good fit or if you're unable to help them, who can help them? How can they actually find a better solution? And this, I would say, it very strongly applies not only to sales, but also to how you manage any kind of personal relationship that you have in your life. And because sometimes you will have to say no. And you have to remember that it's not always about saying yes, not always about being a people pleaser. Every yes that you say no every yes that you say means that you are saying no to something else down the road. So I'll give you a simple example in terms of kind of the difference between being nice versus being kind. A common one that I see, not related to sales though, is I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and some of them are raising capital. And sometimes they pitch, they speak to investors and the investors reject them. And the nice way is just saying like, hey, very interesting idea, but I'm sorry, we're not interested. That's a nice reply. If you truly want to be kind, if you truly want to stand for the person's best interest, then you might actually tell them, you know what? I don't think we are able to invest at this stage because why? Right? So either you can say, oh, you know what? We want to look for companies that are hitting these milestones. Once you hit those milestones, feel free to visit us again and pitch to us again. Or maybe it might be, oh, you know what? We really like your product or solution, but you could have done a better job in your presentation by talking about these points. So whatever you do, your goal is to really support them and give them the knowledge and information that they need to be able to get to the next step, whatever the next step may be. So if you take on that approach on leaving a customer better than when you found them, then I would say that generally, whenever you transition to pitching or positioning a solution, you should never feel that you're being salesy. You should never feel that you're pushing a product that a customer doesn't need. Because if a customer really doesn't need a product or service, you should tell them that. Related to kindness versus niceness, I think one very, very important point is not just to say things for the sake of saying things. And I actually love this quote from the recent movie, The Glass Onion. And here the lady says, hey, I'm a truth teller. Some people can't handle it. And he says it's a dangerous thing to mistake speaking without thought for speaking the truth. So yes, you are being kind, you are standing for someone, but you also want to make sure that you pad your feedback in a way that makes it palatable for them. Because if you give them information and they become defensive, then it doesn't help, right? So don't use kindness as an excuse to be uncouth. You need to be tactful. You need to be mindful about how you present your feedback in order, if you really truly care for the receiver, in order to have them receive it and accept it. So it's not just about giving constructive feedback and stating facts, take it or leave it. You need to tailor it in such a way that it won't hurt them, and in turn, it won't create a situation where they are ignoring your feedback and suggestions because they are just trying to be defensive and justify their own position. All right, that's it for the research side of things. Moving on, then we're going to talk about the answering and the pitching, but I'll save that for a different video.